My name is Karen, and I'm a 25-year-old employee. 6 months ago, my grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today marks the day when the lawyer will open my grandfather's will. That's why I find myself at my grandfather's house, accompanied by my sister Susan, who is 4 years older and my only family. Our parents tragically passed away in an accident 20 years ago, leaving us in the care of our grandparents. Since our grandmother succumbed to illness a few years back, our grandfather's health had been deteriorating steadily, and he frequently fell ill. Out of concern, I lived in an apartment near his house and often checked on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would jest, although he was always cheerful. Then, one day, as I went to visit him as usual, I found him in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called for an ambulance, but he passed away suddenly. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea." My sister's voice snapped me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I responded, heading to the kitchen. Glancing back, I saw my sister lazily stretching out her legs on the mat, yawning. Even in the kitchen, I could still catch a whiff of her strong perfume, and I made a face. "She's the same as always," I murmured under my breath, placing the kettle on the stove. My sister had always been self-centered. As a teenager, she dyed her hair and associated with troublemakers, always demanding money without working. Even when her antics caused trouble, she remained unfazed, leaving me to deal with the fallout. It seemed she hadn't changed much as an adult, with no stable job and drifting around, relying on part-time work. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money when I wasn't around, and I could only imagine how she'd find it troublesome if not for the inheritance. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thank you for coming today." I heard my sister's high-pitched, formal voice announcing the lawyer's arrival. Hurriedly, I placed tea leaves into the teapot and made my way back to the entrance. "Thank you for coming today," I greeted the lawyer. I had met him at the funeral, and his eyes held the same kindness as my grandfather's. A lawyer's badge gleamed on his chest. After we offered incense in front of my grandfather's portrait, he graciously accepted the tea I served before retrieving my grandfather's will. It had been entrusted to him while my grandfather was still alive. The contents were straightforward. My elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, and I, the younger daughter, was to inherit this house and the land it sits on, I read aloud. Upon hearing this, my sister burst into laughter. 20 million in cash for the elder daughter, and only an old house for the younger one? How hilarious. "It's just right for someone as plain as you," she remarked with a sneer. "It's not just the house. There's also the land," I retorted, to which she chuckled snidely. "Huh, the value of this land in such a god-forsaken place is hardly surprising." "Ah, I would have preferred cash. I guess Grandpa must have had a soft spot for me after all," she commented. I can't deny that I am a bit shocked. I suppose my grandfather wanted me to protect his beloved house and land, where he spent his life with my grandmother, I replied thoughtfully. "Huh? A house and land? That's pretty awesome, isn't it?" Brian, my boyfriend, exclaimed in surprise after hearing my story. I shook my head, implying it's not as great as it sounds. "Not really. My sister inherited 20 million in cash. That's more impressive," I admitted, feeling a sense of emptiness as I said it aloud. Even though I was being modest, verbalizing it felt like an acknowledgement. "Wow. Beautiful and have money. Now she's the more the better victory," Brian remarked insensitively. Shooting him a side glance, I noted his gap in sensitivity. Realizing his misstep, he joked, "Your comfort means more to me than money, Karen." Brian had been my boyfriend since I started working. We met at a social event, and being of the same age, we clicked well. I introduced him to my grandfather and my sister. While he hadn't proposed yet, I had been considering marriage. Today was our first date in the wild, and I ended up telling Brian about my inheritance. I suppose it was because I thought he would become my husband someday. I had no idea I would come to regret this. A few days later, I found myself visiting the family home I had inherited from my grandfather. I had intended to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. I figured I could manage it on my own. As I looked around the house, I pondered, it's close to my workplace. Maybe I should move here. Living here leisurely with a cat doesn't sound too bad. There would be no rent to pay, and while there might be maintenance costs for deterioration, I have been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe someday with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call. My sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. "Sis, what's up?" I answered. "Hey, Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house?" My sister sounded drunk. She always had a unique way of extending her words, but today it was particularly bad. "Since you're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still afternoon," I pointed out with a sigh, to which she exaggeratedly sighed back. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes." I was right. She had been drinking. "I was thinking about moving here," I confessed. Eventually, I answered my sister's question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now." My sister raised her voice in a somewhat exaggerated way. "Guess who I'm with right now?" "I have no idea," I replied flatly. "Boring. It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you," she retorted. "What?" I was taken aback when Brian's voice unexpectedly intervened on the line. His sudden intervention threw me off balance, and dizzying question marks popped up in my head. But I resented my imagination. At this point, a disgusting scenario had already formed in my mind. "Surprised? Huh?" My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch." She proceeded to boast about how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, how she knew where he worked because of me, and how she had approached him as soon as he left work. He readily came along when she asked, telling her that she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. Stunned into silence, I listened to her revelations. "Karen, I'm really sorry." Brian's voice broke the silence. "Tell me it's a mistake," I managed to utter, but he spoke again before I could continue. "As a man, I had to take this opportunity," Brian justified, his tone as if asking me to understand. "I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right?" The way he spoke, as if seeking my approval, drained my emotions away. I felt a cold sensation, as if my blood was being drained from me. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I finally uttered. At my words, I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister's. "Well, that's how it is, and from now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke." My sister's words echoed in my ears as she ended the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lagged behind, all I could do was cry out. 5 years had passed since then. I had a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop, purring contentedly in sleep. Today was my day off, but there was still a bit of work left from what I brought home. "Oh no, this won't get the work done," I murmured guiltily as I gently moved the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out, my phone started to ring, displaying an unfamiliar number on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. "Hello?" I greeted. "Karen, long time no see." The voice on the other end instantly made me freeze. It was unmistakably my sister's distinctive way of speaking. "It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister." 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. "You're just the same," I remarked. "By the way, I came home and there's a hotel standing." "Did you sell the house?" Susan inquired. "That's none of your business," I replied curtly. "Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh?" she prodded. Getting fed up, I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years and now had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, whom she was still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. So, lend me some money, Susan demanded. Against Susan's yelling, I answered calmly, I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way, but on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood. I started talking slowly. 5 years ago, when Brian broke up with me, I was crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. I'm such a fool, I murmured as large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. Grandpa, I whispered. When feelings of nostalgia and loneliness welled up and tears started to come, I felt something drop from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I saw it was a fresh sheet of notepaper addressed to me. I remembered how, when I was little, I used to stick notes on the back of this frame and exchange secret messages with my grandfather. It was like a family journal, really. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured I'd find this note. I'm glad I noticed. I shuddered at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. To Karen, the date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. I knew you definitely noticed this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner, cash to your sister, and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me till the end. I finally understood what had been bothering me. No matter what, Grandpa thought more of me, huh? I muttered. I'm sure I was deeply hurt by Susan's words at that time. Despite having loved my grandfather more, a kind of jealousy clouded my thoughts as I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way. If at first glance Susan appears to have received the better deal, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandfather's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time he wrote the letter, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future. When I read this far, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy, the letter conveyed. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, Hag. I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house. Just like Grandfather's letter said, the land value had risen enough anyway. I'm never lending you money. Susan seemed frustrated. But as if she had a good idea, she said, Right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you, so help your sister. It's a good deal, right? At that moment, I heard something snap inside of me. Enough is enough. You've been taken care of by Grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good. I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, I'm sorry. After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable end there now, but they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives, even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it. It's simple for those two, sold the land, and an end was built equals I must be the owner of the end. Of course, the staff reported to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the end. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. Seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement quickly as we were estranged and was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze, and there were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember, especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup in fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved into a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. "Are you okay?" My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. "I'm okay. I have you and this little one," I said, touching my fairly noticeable belly, and smiled back. "In my belly, a new member of our family is growing."